So let me start off by offering my sincere condolences to those Kansas and Wichita State fans that are not able to join the Iowa State Cyclones in the Sweet 16. I did have both of those teams there, by the way, just for your information. So they are sincere condolences. That Wichita game was awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, I wish it would have came the other way, but that was...
They gave the ball to one of their lower percentage three-point shooters.
Yeah, I didn't get that at the end either. I thought it should have been early or vaguer.
Yeah, it should have been early or vaguer. That's all I was.
I thought so too. All right, does anybody have any questions before we start today? Welcome back. I hope you're all refreshed, ready to slide into the home stretch of April.
I'm in the wrong country.
So you're in the wrong country? Oh yeah, that's right. You guys had your Italian adventures. So, all right. Well, in tribute to your trip to Italy, we are talking about international finance and exchange rates. So hopefully that'll give you a feel for the nice memories of where you were at, whatever country you were in during spring break, including the United States. So let's see. I guess let's bring this back from the start since we've had a week off. So we mostly started the class off in chapter 4 and 5 talking about our little world here, although we did talk about international to begin with, right? But that was more international trade. But thinking about the aggregate flows of the economy in the United States, we had our cigarettes, breaking our spending into consumption, investment, government spending, and net exports. So this chapter kind of ties into the funding of those net exports because within the financial sector, that sector up here where there are flows of funds for borrowing and saving that we spent some time on, one little subsection of that financial sector is the foreign exchange market. And so before we can actually complete the trade, the Chinese want yuan rather than dollars, and vice versa is true for us. Yuan doesn't do us much good when we run to Walmart to buy the things that we want. So there's kind of a double trade that goes on. It's us buying Chinese goods, but then it's also us exchanging U.S. currency for their currency. So it's kind of a double transaction. And so that subset is this foreign exchange market that we've been working on. Okay. So last time what we started off with was spending time in the kind of the supply and demand, thinking about the appreciation and depreciation of currencies and how that works through both the demand and supply of goods in the market, as well as the supply and demand of financial assets, such as bonds and other financial instruments. So today we're going to take a little bit different twist and start off with some international accounting. And believe me, I'm very grateful to have Professor Wagner handle all the accounting. I'm not much in the accounting sector, but we got a little bit of books to kind of keep track of on the international realm. So we've got some international accounting. And it's more or less each country keeping track of the flows across their border. And so each country keeps track of its payments of all kinds, payments to and from other countries. And we have what we call balance of payments accounts. There are 3 balance of payment accounts. The first one we've kind of talked about, called the current account. And what the current account keeps track of, so I just like to put here, keeps track of the value of exports minus the value of imports. This is our cigarettes part. We have a dollar value of things we sold to China minus the value of the stuff we bought from them, the plastic toys and other things we get from them, right? So we got the dollar value of exports minus the dollar value of imports. This is our cigarettes. This is the big X at the end of the day. So the value of those two things, the title, or another name we call this is the current account, because it does have a little bit of additional information. This is the one in the cigarettes thing, but we also have net interest paid. Net interest paid, one country's interest versus another country's interest. And then also net transfers. Money that we give versus minus what they give us. So this one down here, the transfer payments, is what we give minus what they give us. And as you can imagine, the United States is a net giver, right? We give more than what other countries give to us. But it's possible that some government or people wanted to help the homeless in the United States as part of a funding effort, and so we got some money in across our borders. Okay, so all three of these things, again, this is kind of our cigarettes part here, so I want you to kind of highlight that. Exports minus imports. And this is also called our trade deficit. So when we just hone into just exports minus imports, we think about it being our trade in the United States account, the trade deficit. Let's put that in quotes because I'm not being perfectly correct here. Because a negative number up here means we import more from the rest of the world than what we sell to them, so we have a trade deficit. And that's this chunk of the current account. All right, so that's the first payment account. Number two is the capital account. Capital and financial account. And what this little set of books keeps track of, what this one keeps track of, is foreign investment in the U.S. minus U.S. investment in the rest of the world. Row. And then we've got this little statistical discrepancy, because some of this stuff is pretty hard to keep track of. In theory, debits should equal credits, so this is the part that accountants really wouldn't tolerate this, by the way, on a business level. We wouldn't have, they figure out every penny, right? You go to debits got to equal credits, we got to figure out every penny. But as you can imagine, with illegal activity and other things going on, we don't have a perfect set of books in the keeping track of what's going on at the country level. So they throw in this statistical discrepancy. And so that all ends up being equal to the capital account balance. And I see that I forgot something here on this one. So when the Chinese government buys the bonds, buys U.S. government bonds, remember what those are? Those are the things that anybody can buy. Right? So when the Chinese government buys a government bond, right? I owe you $1 million, love Obama, right? That piece of paper that the government helps fund their deficits with, that is foreign investment in the United States. So they are essentially giving money to us, and then at the same time, the U.S. government or U.S. citizens in general can be investing in the rest of the world. We might buy German bonds or Ukrainian bonds, maybe, if we're crazy. So we take the difference between that, and that sets up the net inflow of capital. One thing I need you to add over here that I forgot was this minus these things gives you the current account balance. So the one, and I'm kind of out of board space here, but so draw a line underneath here, and I will continue up top. So whatever that answer turns out to be ends up being equal to the current account balance. All right. And lastly, number 3 is the official settlements account. The official settlements account. And it keeps track of foreign government holdings, of U.S. currency. Foreign government holdings of U.S. currency minus U.S. government, which would be the Federal Reserve, U.S. government holdings of row currency, the rest of the world's currencies. The next thing we'll cover in a bit here is some governments choose to enter the foreign exchange market to keep the exchange rate fixed as a policy measure. In order to do that, they have to hold currencies from other countries. So they have to hold US dollars to maintain a certain exchange rate. So we'll cover that here in a little bit, but that's why this little section is important. And so if we take the net effect of these two things, we get the official settlements balance. All right, here's the key thing. This is the big key, the keynote here. All three of these things must sum to 0. All three balances must sum to 0. So that's one of the key parts of this whole exercise, is that all three balances must sum to 0. So this is kind of in accounting, you know, debits equal credits. Or in maybe Russ terms here, what I sold to you is what you bought from me. That's why on a global level, all three of these things must equal 0 at the end of the day. All right, so what do we know, what have we learned about the U.S. current account balance? So note number 2 here. What have we learned about the U.S. current account balance? What does that sucker look like if we look at this information? It's 0? No, it's not 0. Just the current account doesn't, just this part doesn't shake out to be 0. It's in the red, so it's negative, right? So that is our trade deficit. We export much less than we import. So this one's big right here. We've got all those Chinese imports. We've got all the European imports. Americans have been really big consumers of foreign products over the years, so much so that it exceeds the amount of American products that we sell to the rest of the world. And something's got to give. In other words, if we go back to Tom and Jen on the island and we have 20 coconuts being traded for 11 fish or whatever, right? There's no money involved. Those two things have to be equal. Well, if they're not equal, something's got to give. Who owes who money? If we have imported more than we've exported, does the U.S. owe the rest of the world something, or does the rest of the world owe the U.S. something? Who owes whom money? We imported more than we gave up. So as a country, do we owe the rest of the world something, or do they owe us? We owe them, right? So we bought more. This is like going on credit, right? You don't have the money, but oh, I'll just use this plastic thing. Zip, there you go. So you haven't given up as much as you got, and so you owe them money. Now, how that works is that we just go give them a piece of paper instead, right? So like, oh yeah, well, we just like your plasticky stuff that you give us. It's a lot of fun. Will you take this instead of U.S. currency that you have to flow through? You know, after you got to do that exchange rate stuff anyway. Why don't you take this piece of paper? It'll be good, right? So what's happened then is the Chinese and other countries have just done this. And they wanted to, by the way. This is all free market stuff. This is not, they're not being coerced into buying this. This is just how the market system shakes itself out. Through supply and demand mechanism, they voluntarily want to put some dollars back in the U.S. And so the U.S. has been an attractive spot to put their money. For one thing, the U.S. government, as we've talked about, has always been pretty good about paying their bills. What's their default rate? 0. Never defaulted. Always pay back our bills. So not every country can say that, especially now going through the financial crisis. So the U.S. has been a pretty good spot to save your money. The Chinese have been great savers, so that's a pretty good trade. They make us plasticky stuff, and then they save their money with us, essentially, by one way or the other. They end up investing in the United States. Now, since all three balances must sum to 0, what's going on with the capital account? What does it look like? What does it have to look like if we believe in this accounting thing? And by the way, this ends up being a real small piece of the puzzle. So this is real tiny. If we've got a big deficit here, what's going on here? A lot of foreign investment. So we have a surplus. A deficit here for the United States means that we have a surplus here. We have excess funds in our capital account. So foreigners are putting their money back into the United States, and we have a capital account surplus. So that part usually gets downplayed by the media, and it's bad that we've got a trade deficit, and boy, we better correct that. We better do some stuff there. But what's always true is that that is accompanied by a capital account surplus. All right, questions or comments there? Now, one of the things that has been a contributing factor that I'll just kind of interject slightly here, we'll spend some time on this more. This is part of what fueled the housing bubble and the financial crisis in 2008. So part of what caused the, at least a contributing factor of what caused there to be some bubbles and some bubbles breaking in the United States is that the rest of the world found the United States an attractive place to bring money to. An increase in the supply of funds, the supply of savings, does what to interest rates? Try to visualize that. Let's see if I can do this. Am I good? I don't want to write on the wall, really. Okay, good. Oh, I've never done this before. Let's see, we got maybe an interest rate here. Actually, that should be a R, real rate of interest. And then we've got loanable funds down here. An increase in supply. Wow. Did I do this? Oh, that was there. Okay. I was like, I remember coming here and I didn't know if I like did a little cosine wave or what that is going across. Wow, that wasn't too bad. I even almost crossed off my eye there. Okay, so an increase in supply leads to what with interest rates? They go up or down? Down, right? So when the rest of the world starts supplying funds to us, lowers the interest rates, making it cheaper for us to buy stuff like houses. Right? And so we buy more houses. Houses become in short supply, maybe. We start bidding up the price of the houses. Houses that used to sell for $120,000 are now selling for $150,000, $160,000, $180,000, $190,000. The housing bubble bursts. Boom, comes down. Right? So that was a contributing factor. A larger factor that maybe we'll get into a little more later, I think, would be the Federal Reserve keeping interest rates lower and not letting the market kind of come back up. So anyway, a lot of other contributing factors, but this was certainly a big one in it. Okay, questions or comments there?
You gonna write out from that too?
Oh yeah, note number 2. What was it? All three balances must sum to 0. So the U.S. trade deficit, which is what we've done for the last 30 years, is offset with a capital account surplus. A capital account surplus. Because they need, that's just the way the world works with the little accounting. Had to be funded, that trade deficit had to be funded somehow. Okay, anything else? All right, so our last topic here in the exchange rate international finance chapter is exchange rate policy. Did everybody get this? Good. All right, so I alluded to it earlier. Countries can choose how they want their currency to be traded. Do they want to let the market determine their exchange rate through supply and demand forces that we've already explored? Or do they want to manipulate the market so that their exchange rate stays constant? Okay, so let's call this exchange rate. I think I'm dead on this one. Exchange rate policy. So this is flexible versus fixed. A flexible versus fixed exchange rate. All right, the flexible is the one we've kind of talked about as we went through the supply and demand graphs. So a flexible exchange rate policy allows the nominal exchange rate, little e, to adjust freely without direct government, which would be usually central bank, but sometimes those are one and the same in some countries, without direct government intervention. So the graph that we did before was something like this. We had the quantity of money being exchanged in the foreign exchange market. We had the amount of yen per dollar, just to kind of refresh your memory, supply and demand. As the demand and supply of financial products, of imports and exports, as that sort of stuff changes around within each country, that can cause the currency to appreciate or depreciate, right? We just kind of let the market be free. That's called a flexible policy on the part of the government. So the government's intentionally leaving the market be in terms of exchange rates. All right, so that's a flexible. The one important note, though, to add to this is that as the Fed, our central bank here in the United States, but this would be true of other countries that follow a flexible exchange rate regime, as the Fed pursues other monetary policy, it will affect the exchange rate. But this is done in theory. This is an indirect effect. So we spent chapter 8 talking about Federal Reserve policy, right? And what do I mean by that statement? What does that mean? As the Fed pursues other monetary policy, it will affect exchange rates. What kind of policy might they do? You had to know 3 of them, or we covered 3. And I know it's been a week, and Lord knows what you did on your spring break. But I'm guessing econ every day was not at the top of your list. So what are those 3 policy tools that the Fed had? So they had 3 policy tools at their disposal. Okay, it's similar to quantitative easing, but I'm thinking I want to hear the 3 policy tools. Who's got them? I got my extra credit pen ready to go. Yes, Jason.
Or is it open market purchase?
Yes, that is one. Open market purchase. Good. All right, what else did we have? So we'll give Jason the winner for finding that first here. There was 2 other ones. Well, open market operations would be more generic. They could do an open market sale or an open market purchase. And then what else? Discount rate and the required reserve ratio, right. Now, what did they do that for? Those were 3 tools that they could use to influence what? What was the objective of using those tools? What was their purpose? Change the money supply. And why do they want to change the money supply? What would that influence, I guess, to kind of keep the chain of events? Gabe? The quantity that's in circulation is the money supply, and what is that linked to? Interest rates. So if the Federal Reserve, for domestic purposes only, they don't give a rip about the Chinese, let's just pretend, even though they might. If for domestic purposes only, they want to lower interest rates, maybe to stimulate housing, maybe to, whatever. Do something for our country, doing it selfishly for the United States. they might choose to use one of those three tools, increase the money supply, drop interest rates. But when they increase the money supply, you can see that that's going to change the game potentially for players in the foreign exchange market too, right? Because now there's more dollars floating around. More dollars floating around causes what? What did Milton Friedman teach us about? An increase in the money supply in the long run will lead to increase in the price level. Good. So inflation, right? So increase the money supply by 10%, inflation goes up by 10%, right? That's what Friedman's prediction was. So in that regard, when we have more money floating around and it influences inflation rates, then if you look back in your notes from last time, I think, we had the relationship of the price levels with exchange rates. And so whether they're doing it directly or indirectly, the Federal Reserve may have some influence on exchange rates. But the idea here with a flexible policy means we're not intentionally doing anything to goof around with exchange rates per se. That's not our primary objective. Okay, questions or comments there? All right, how about a fixed policy? So, a fixed policy. So I guess we'll put we can call this number 1, we don't have to, I guess. But number 2, a fixed exchange rate policy. Under the fixed system, the government chooses the exchange rate. The government chooses the exchange rate they want it to be and buys or sells currency in the foreign exchange market buys or sells currency in the foreign exchange market to maintain a fixed exchange rate. So this time let me put the quantity of yuan down here, not dollars. And if we're measuring yuan there, we can have dollars per yuan here. Again, we didn't do this way before, but we can look at it this way or we can look at it that way. For most of your stuff, maybe all of your stuff in your book, other than trying to show this point here, this is the graph that you need to know for most of your homework problems and test problems. So I don't want to overemphasize, but we can go back and forth here. If it looks like this, if there is an increase if the yuan is currently trading at 8 yuan, or $8 per yuan, then, and we've got some sort of equilibrium here, so let's just call it Y1. If there's an increase in the demand for yuan because Americans want plasticky stuff, normally that would cause an appreciation of the yuan. Right? So now the yuan is going up in value, which means it used to cost me $1 to get 8 yuan. Now $1 only gets me 10 yuan. Or it takes 10 yuan to get $1, vice versa. So if the government wants to keep the yuan fixed, if they have chosen this to be the level that they want it trading at, then they will need to increase the supply of yuan to the market and buy up those dollars. So the government's entering the marketplace and offsetting whatever changes happen in the currency market. They are going to buy or sell their currency to keep the exchange rate fixed. And that's what the Chinese have done for a long period of time. They are now starting to ratchet that up. In fact, it used to be as low as 6, I believe. And so now they're starting to allow it to change and appreciate a bit. But they were trying to keep us hooked on their junk. It's kind of like a drug dealer being hooked on the stuff, right? Oh, we love those cheap Chinese products. Keep them coming, right? We gotta keep that stuff low. And so they thought that that was one way to better prosperity in China, is to keep the exchange rate fixed at that level. Okay, so that is one the difference here with flexible and fixed. And the important note to add on to this is that if a government chooses to follow a fixed exchange rate policy, they don't have the freedom to do what our Federal Reserve has been doing. Oh, well, we want to pursue this domestic policy, because you can't kind of do one without the other. You can't follow both. So if you keep a fixed exchange rate, that takes away your power to use monetary policy to affect domestic interest rates. Right? So you kind of got to choose one or the other, and that's part of the reason that the U.S. government pursues a flexible exchange rate here, so that they can use monetary policy to influence things domestically. So note, this means that other monetary policy tools cannot be used. Another way to word that is that a government that follows a fixed exchange rate policy rule, that is their monetary policy. So if you follow a fixed exchange rate, that is your monetary policy. All right, the last little nibble on this is one small variation with a fixed exchange rate, and that's called a crawling peg. So number 3, I guess, would be a crawling peg. And quite frankly, China is now starting to be close to this. A crawling peg is, we're going to fix our exchange rate for the next 6 months, and then we'll think about changing it again. So for a fixed period of time, they keep it fixed, but then they allow it to make small adjustments over time. So if you were to graph out, you know, the United States exchange rate might look like this, nice squiggly lines. A crawling peg might look like this. And then on this day we changed it, and then on this day we changed it, and then on this day we changed it, right? So it'd be fixed over some periods of time. So it's just kind of a combination. So this is also sometimes referred to as a dirty float. Instead of letting the exchange rate float freely like the United States does, we intervene, and so it's not quite clean float, it's a dirty float. So small changes over time. Small changes in fixed E over time. All right, questions or comments on this stuff? there's kind of a couple interesting things that pop out of this. One is, as the Chinese government supplies you onto the market, they are literally buying up dollars. So remember that official settlements balance, the foreign government holdings of U.S. currency? They are hoarding large amounts of U.S. currency because of their previous exchange rate regimes, which creates an interesting dynamic on the international market, that we have a government that's holding large volumes of currency, and they could potentially, dump them on the market or whatever. On the flip side is if you have to sell U.S. currency to maintain the exchange rate, eventually the Chinese government would run out of dollars. Because what can the government do? What can the Federal Reserve do if they need more dollars? Print them, right? But the Chinese government can't do that. They can print more yuan, but they can't print more of the foreign currency. So another problem that governments have run into in the past is that as they have to make adjustments to their fixed exchange rate, they can run out of the currency if they need to make the adjustment in the other direction. And then they can't, then they have to make a permanent adjustment down. And there's kind of this neat example of a multi-billionaire, I can't remember his name, over in England, that broke the bank of England and made $1 zillion. Of course, I don't know the real amount, that's why I said $1 zillion. He entered the market and kept supplying British pounds, and the British government had a fixed exchange rate policy, and they had to keep selling their dollars. They eventually ran out, and what he was betting on is that eventually they'd run out and they'd have to drop the exchange rate. And when it dropped, then he made $1 zillion with the ones he was holding. And he had enough money, and this was a risky deal at the time he did it. I don't think he knew for sure how it was going to work out, but he ended up making a bunch of money. And so that's another reason that governments tend to go towards flexible or crawling peg is more of the reality now that we've seen some lessons learned with manipulation problems. Okay, so any other questions or comments? So we start the biggie today. We start the goods market. Chapter 10. So I told you 4 to 5 weeks ago that we were going to attempt to explain some of the world's markets in 4 places. And so we started off with the labor market and looked at the demand for labor and the supply of labor and the real wage. One of our primary resources that we care about in the United States is the bucket of labor that we got going on and the wages that they're earning. Then we moved into the capital market and learned that the world market for loanable funds is global. We've got savers from around the world, we've got demanders from around the world, and they get together and influence the real rate of interest. Then we dropped down into the money market, and we had the demand for money and the supply of money. The supply of money was vertical because of the reasons we just talked about, that the Federal Reserve at its discretion can change policy to increase the supply of money or decrease it, right, to change interest rates. And now we're over to the granddaddy of them all. A lot of macro textbooks start with this one, and I really like the approach that this book takes in building up to it rather than starting with it. And so what I like to refer to this as the goods market. It's the goods market because it's measuring the quantity of all goods and services. what we learned in Chapter 4 as real GDP. The quantity of all goods and services, the dollar value of all final goods and services produced within a nation's boundaries over the course of a year, right? The big kahuna here, real GDP. And then it has a connection to the price level, as we learned. So the price level was the average level of the prices of all final goods and services, right? So we had this connection. We talked in, those of you who had microeconomics, we had quantity of pizza and the price of pizza, right? And now we've gotten a little more creative and we said, here's the quantity of money and the price of money. So we got that same connection going on here at the macro level with the quantity of stuff and the average price of things. All right, so we're going to have a supply and demand framework to operate in here as well. And the one I want to start you off with is what we call the long run aggregate supply. The long run aggregate supply. And I'm just going to give it to you. It looks something like this. Long run aggregate supply, the LAS curve, looks like that. The long run supply of the quantity of goods and services, if we start to dissect this, long run supply of all the things we can make looks like this. What does that mean? Looking at the variables that we have here. If you have a function that looks like that, that's got a little bit of slope to it. It's meant to be vertical, sorry. Not my best drawing ever. Why is it vertical? What does that imply? Hunter? Okay, the price level is unlimited. Not quite. You're dabbling on the right thing, but I want it articulated a little bit differently. You're not too far off. Brandon?
Are you looking for that it's inelastic?
It is perfectly inelastic, but no, I'm not looking for that. I want closer to what Hunter was talking about with what is the relationship between the price level and the quantity of goods and services in the long run. What does this function tell you about the relationship between that variable and this variable? Where's my math people? You should have that. They're independent, right? So whenever we see a function drawn like this in a two-dimensional space with this variable and this variable, if the graph is either like that or if it looks like this, it means the two variables are independent of each other. They're not related to each other. So in other words, the amount of stuff we can have on our island is independent of the prices of that stuff. If we think about all the goods and services we can have on our island, it's independent of the prices of that stuff. What does it depend on? What does the quantity of stuff on our island depend on? What's the real stuff it depends on if it doesn't depend on prices? People wanting it? I want to think about the production of it. So that plays into it, but it's more of a combination of things. What is the production of stuff dependent upon? The resources. Good. What else? Resources. Like what? Resources like what? Labor, land, capital, right? The basic resources of the economy. What else went into this thing? Production possibilities frontier shows the maximum combination of two goods an economy can produce given its available resources and resources and I don't know if I can let you out of this room until I hear it. I'm ready for next credit point. Resources and, if you take a guess, you're not going to die. No. 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 Technology. Bing, 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 bing. What do we got there? All right, good job. We'll see you on Wednesday.